Ants, small, strong, and extremely organized, these fascinating creatures can be defined as true symbols of cooperation, collective thinking, and that never leave a member of the group behind. Well, maybe almost never. But the fact is that even though they are such common insects and present in practically every place on the planet, there are many incredible curiosities about these animals that are not known by most people. From ants that build nests using their own bodies, to ants used in cooking and even in medicine in some cultures, these and several other curious facts are exactly what we have gathered to present in today's video. 20 things you didn't know about ants. Honeypot ants. When we think of honey, it's almost automatic to remember bees. But what if I told you that there are also ants specialized in storing this resource, known popularly as honeypot ants? These fantastic creatures, which can be found mainly in desert regions of North America, Australia, and Africa, belong to several different species and basically consist of worker ants that turn into true living reservoirs, ending up with a swollen and translucent abdomen filled with a sweet liquid, which, although not technically honey like that produced by bees, ended up receiving that name due to its appearance. During periods of food abundance, these special workers are fed by the other ants until their abdomens become extremely distended, and thus, during the following months, they remain immobile hanging from the ceiling of the nest, serving as living reservoirs of food that keep the colony supplied during periods of drought and scarcity. And the curiosity doesn't stop there, considering that in many regions where they are native, honeypot ants have been consumed for centuries by local peoples as a natural delicacy and an important source of nutrition in arid environments and with few resources. Death spiral. Ants are known for their impeccable organization and for being extremely methodical, but in many cases, even they can end up making mistakes. And one of the most famous examples of this refers to this impressive scene you are seeing now, the result of a phenomenon popularly known as the death spiral. Basically, ants follow chemical pheromone trails to orient themselves, and in most cases, this system works with such efficiency that it allows them to form long, perfectly coordinated lines to find food and return to the nest without getting lost. However, in very specific situations, this same method can become a problem when a group of ants separates from the main trail and starts following each other so that they end up trapped in a continuous spiral where they all walk in circles one after another without realizing the mistake. This rare phenomenon has already been documented both in nature and in controlled studies and ended up being called death spiral precisely because when trapped in this pattern, ants usually continue moving until exhaustion. Weaver ants. When we think of ants, it is almost natural to imagine these creatures living in nests built in tree trunks, under stones, or in burrows dug into the ground. However, not all ants around our planet follow this pattern, and an impressive example of this is the weaver ants, a remarkable genus of ants that stand out for their unique nest-building skills using silk and leaves. These fantastic architects can be found mainly in tropical regions of Asia, Africa, and Oceania, and they build their nests in trees, stitching live leaves together with the help of their larvae. These larvae produce silk that the adult ants use as glue, joining the edges of the leaves and creating compartments inside the nest. The nests resulting from this work are light but extremely resistant structures that protect the colony against predators and adverse weather conditions. And the most interesting thing about all this is that, due to the fact that these ants build their nests in tree leaves and not on the forest floor like most other ant species, this significantly reduces the risks of attacks by terrestrial animals. Living sutures. Before the invention of modern surgical sutures, some ancient cultures had already discovered an ingenious way to close wounds, and it basically consisted of using ants for that. In regions of Africa, India, and South America, indigenous peoples and other traditional groups use soldier ants with large and strong mandibles as a kind of biological staple to stop deep cuts and join the edges of wounds. The process was straightforward and effective, since it was enough to position the ant with its abdomen away from the wound and stimulate its head to bite the two open edges of the skin. In this way, by forcefully clamping their mandibles, these ants kept the tissues firmly united, and at that moment, the rest of the ant's body was removed, but the head remained attached to the wound, functioning as a kind of natural stitch. Fungus farming. Most likely at some point in your life, you have heard that leafcutter ants eat leaves. But did you know that this is not exactly true? That's because, although they are known for carrying huge pieces of leaves through tropical forests, these ants do not feed directly on the leaves they cut, but instead use them to cultivate fungus. Inside their underground nests, with chambers that can reach several meters in depth, these ants deposit fragments of fresh leaves in carefully prepared places, creating a fungal garden that they tend with extreme dedication. This is because they clean every piece of leaf, control temperature and humidity, and remove contaminated parts so as to always ensure the total quality of this fungus production, which is the only food source for the larvae and also the main food for the queen. Organized invasion. We have to admit that when it comes to the importance of teamwork, there is no better example to represent it than ants. That's because, when acting together, these small insects are capable of performing true logistical miracles, and the case we are about to show now is simply one of the most incredible examples of this. This video you are watching now shows a structure made entirely by hundreds of ants, firmly connected to each other by claws and mandibles, that descended from the roof, forming this kind of living chain, to be able to reach and raid a wasp nest. This fantastic structure is based on a simple but extremely efficient principle. Each ant connects to the next one strategically, distributing the weight along the structure to avoid ruptures, and so while those at the top cling to the edge of the house, the others go down and connect to each other until reaching the destination. But the question that remains is, couldn't they simply have used one of the edges of the house to get there? But where would the fun be in that, right? Colorful ants. When we think of animals that change color, it is common to remember chameleons or octopuses. But what if I told you that some ants also belong on this list? And the reason for this is not because of any trick or special ability, but simply as a result of what these animals eat, considering that some ant species can change color depending on the substance they ingest. This curiosity was revealed by researchers and enthusiasts who, in simple experiments, offered ants colored drops of sugar water mixed with food coloring, and the result was a true living gallery of ants in several colors, such as red, blue, green, and yellow, for example, all thanks to the translucency of the final part of these insects' abdomens. Since the exoskeleton of certain species is partially transparent, the ingested content becomes visible through the body, and so when they feed on strongly pigmented liquids, the coloration of the food appears directly in the abdomen of these workers, creating a visual effect that, although temporary, is truly surprising. The Queen's mission. Well, we have already seen that leafcutter ants cultivate fungi in a very interesting and unique process, but something just as fascinating as this process is the beginning of a new colony. On certain days of the year, depending on temperature, humidity, and even atmospheric pressure, thousands of winged ants emerge simultaneously from their nests to mate in the air in a process called nuptial flight. And with this, the queens, which mate with several males, store enough sperm to fertilize eggs for the rest of their lives, while the males die just a few hours later. However, it is after this that the real challenge begins, since right after the flight, the queen falls to the ground and moves to a protected spot where she rips off her own wings and starts digging a small hole, where she creates the first chamber of the new anthill. During this initial period, she does not feed on external sources, relying exclusively on her internal reserves, and when the first eggs hatch, this queen feeds the larvae with a rich and nutritious substance that she herself regurgitates. With this, only after the birth of the first workers, which will leave the chamber to search for food, can the queen finally focus solely on laying eggs. Nevertheless, although it is very interesting, this process is extremely risky, and thus the vast majority of these queens die before even founding a colony, whether due to predators, adverse conditions, or failure in the development of the first larvae. Mobile ant nest. Well, I must admit that until now, I was in doubt about which is more interesting. The deep nests dug in the soil, like those made by leafcutter ants, or the nests produced with silk and leaves at the tops of trees, as in the case of weaver ants. But honestly, I think none of them could compete with the nests built by the species popularly known as army ants, which can be found mainly in the tropical forests of Central and South America, and which stand out for building structures using simply their own bodies. These ants connect their legs and mandibles to form living and temporary shelters, with walls and roofs made up of thousands or even millions of interlocked workers, and at the center of this structure, the larvae, the eggs, and the queen are kept protected. These ants are highly efficient predators and do not feed on leaves, like leafcutter ants for example, but instead attack other insects, spiders, larvae, and even small vertebrates. And unlike most other ants, this nest of bodies built by these species is not permanent, but serves only as a temporary camp, usually used for a few weeks, while the colony feeds intensively in a given area. In this way, when resources run out, the structure is dismantled, and the colony moves on in search of new regions, setting up another temporary shelter wherever necessary. Impossible to count. Now, let's talk numbers. It is currently estimated that there are more than 20 quadrillion ants alive in the world. That's right, exactly that absurd amount of zeros you see on the screen. 20 quadrillion individuals. For comparison, this means there are more than 2.5 million ants for every human being on Earth. Just among known species, about 14,000 have been cataloged, but specialists estimate that number could exceed 20,000 when considering those still undiscovered. Finally, in terms of biomass, the dominance is equally impressive, given that the total weight of all the ants on the planet may rival the weight of all human beings combined. Well, I honestly don't even know what to say. I just sincerely hope that humans never try to wage a battle against these insects. Ants RAFT. It is certainly more than proven that ants are some of the best builders in the entire animal kingdom. No one can disagree with that. But have you ever stopped to think about how these insects survive in situations of flooding? Well, the solution lies in ant rafts, simply one of the most impressive and ingenious adaptations in the entire animal kingdom. During periods of heavy rains and flooding, some species of ants, such as fire ants, join their bodies together using their mandibles and legs to create a floating platform that can include thousands of individuals, known as ant rafts. By interlocking their legs and mandibles, they form a kind of network that prevents them from sinking, functioning almost like a boat that repels water. And while individually ants already show a reasonable hydrophobic capacity, repelling water and often being able to float, this ability becomes even greater when they unite, thus allowing the raft to float. The queens, larvae, and pupae are usually kept in the center of the raft, where they are more protected from the water and predators, while the worker ants make up the base of the structure, supporting the weight and maintaining balance, generally alternating their positions over time to ensure that none of them remain tired or submerged for long periods. Zombie ants. We have already seen that ants and fungi can have a cooperative relationship that sustains an entire colony. However, not all fungi are considered allies for ants, since in some cases certain types of fungi can become a true nightmare for these insects. And the proof of this are certain fungi of a genus called Ophiocordyceps, which are capable of infecting ants in such an extreme way that they take total control of their bodies and minds, turning them into true zombie ants. One of the best known examples is the fungus of the species Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, which affects thousands of ants every year in a process that basically works as follows. The ant is infected by the spore of the fungus that grows inside its body, and once it is sufficiently developed, it begins to control the behavior of the ant. Under the control of the fungus, the ant then leaves its colony and climbs a plant. It then bites the central vein of a leaf or a branch, where it becomes permanently attached, allowing the fungus to grow through its body and later emerge from the insect's head, releasing spores that fall below to infect other ants. Devil's Gardens. In the middle of the Amazon rainforest, there are strangely open areas where almost no plant grows, except for a single species with the scientific name Duroia hirsuta. For a long time, it was believed that these mysterious clearings were the work of spirits or supernatural forces, which led these spaces to be known as the Devil's Gardens. But over the years, science revealed that in fact the real culprit was a species of ant. What happens is that these ants live exclusively in Duroia hirsuta and do everything they can to eliminate any plant that is not their host plant. To do this, they inject formic acid into the leaves and stems of other plants, killing them slowly, and the result of this are these almost perfect clearings, dominated only by the trees that shelter their colony. Vampire ants. After everything that has already been shown so far, you might even think that nothing else about ants could surprise you. But if you really think that, maybe it's time to change your mind, because now it's time to talk about species of ants, popularly known as vampire ants, which get this name due to an unusual feeding strategy that basically consists of piercing the bodies of their own larvae to extract a fluid rich in proteins and sugars, but without killing them or causing permanent damage. This behavior, which is completely different from the traditional feeding of ants we usually see out there, tends to occur mainly in underground colonies that rarely go out to search for food, considering that instead, for these ants, their own larvae serve as living reservoirs of nutrients, allowing the workers to feed without leaving the nest. The most painful sting. If you've ever been stung by an ant, you probably remember well the annoying pain that must have lasted for some time. Now imagine something hundreds of times worse, capable of causing muscle spasms, fever, dizziness, and a pain so intense that it feels like an electric shock burning from the inside. Well, that is exactly the perfect description of the bullet ant sting, considered the ant with the most painful sting in the world, and one of the most painful among all insects ever studied. This species lives in tropical regions of Central and South America, and attacks with a powerful stinger, capable of piercing the skin and injecting a toxin called poneurotoxin, which directly affects the nerves and amplifies the pain almost immediately. To give you an idea, according to the famous Schmidt pain scale, created by the entomologist Justin Orville Schmidt, who allowed himself to be stung by dozens of different insects, the bullet ant reaches level 4.0, which is simply the maximum on the scale. Delicious ants. Remember when I said that the journey of leafcutter ant queens after the nuptial flight was not easy at all, and that most of them died shortly after starting their mission? Well, and one of the reasons for that is precisely human beings, since in some parts of the world, these ants are consumed as a delicacy, as in Colombia, for example, where they are popularly known as hormigas culonas, and eaten as a common snack during the seasons when these ants leave their nests to reproduce. But that is not the only way in which ants are consumed. In Mexico, for example, Eskimos are highly valued, which in fact are not the ants themselves, but their eggs, which are extracted from underground nests and then prepared in different ways. Indian harvester ants. Now let's talk about other ants responsible for building a nest of a very distinctive style, which in this case stands out for its unusual entrance. Found mainly in arid and semi-arid regions of Asia, the Indian harvester ants are known for their great capacity for organization and division of labor, and can truly be considered specialists in collecting and storing seeds. These ants build underground nests with several chambers that are used to store seeds, take care of the larvae, and shelter the queen, and the architecture of these nests is truly impressive. That is because their entrance has a rather curious appearance when seen from above, strongly resembling a labyrinth, with concentric walls that prevent rainwater from entering the nest, and it is also believed that this type of entrance may serve as protection against predators, making their path into the anthill much more difficult. Ant gloves. Well, we've already seen that the bullet ant is the ant with the most painful sting in the world. Now imagine purposely putting both hands inside gloves full of these ants. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but this frightening practice really exists. It is a traditional rite of passage that marks the moment when a young man becomes an adult among the indigenous SUTURES Maui tribe in the Amazon region. For this, the elders weave gloves made of leaves and fibers, and then place inside them dozens of live bullet ants with their stingers pointing inward. The young men must then put their hands into these gloves and keep them there for several minutes while being stung by one of the most painful creatures on the planet. And as if that weren't enough, this ritual doesn't happen just once, since to fully complete the passage, the young men have to repeat this process about 20 times throughout their lives. Aphid farm. Now let's talk about some species of ants that stand out for creating their own herds, but not of cattle, rather of aphids. These tiny insects are often found sucking the sap of plants, and during this process, they produce a sweet substance that is highly valued by ants, which, by stimulating the aphids with their antennae, can make them release this substance so they can feed on it. In this way, to ensure access to this substance, many species of ants protect the aphids, take care of them, and defend them from predators, in some cases even transporting these aphids to other parts of the plant, or even carrying them into the anthill, thus ensuring that they are always safe. And with that, both sides benefit, since the aphids gain protection and shelter, while the ants receive a constant source of food. Pet ants. Well, I don't know about you, but after seeing so many interesting things about ants, I have to admit, I felt like having my own ant farm at home. But did you know that this is actually possible? That's right. It may seem strange at first, but nowadays there are already a large number of people around the world who practice domestic ant keeping, and who, with the help of structures usually made of glass and that imitate natural anthills, are able to closely observe the daily life of a colony, watching the queen, the birth of workers, the foraging routes, and even the growth of the underground chambers. Well, to me it seems like an interesting idea. I think I'll try to raise my own ants. Well, except for this type here. But what about you? Do you know any other interesting fact or curiosity about ants? Share it with us in the comments. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.